Raiders Dolphins coming up on Sunday, week 11 action, and we get you ready for it here on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for Thursday, November 14th, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. You know, we appreciate you, whether you're checking us out wherever you find your favorite podcast, or if you're checking us out on YouTube. It's awesome. We appreciate that. And if you are checking us out by way of YouTube, thank you so much. That show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of my man Ari, who does a great job making sure we look good and we sound good by way of YouTube. So we shout him out. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. I'm on Twitter as well, at your boy Q254. And normally we have the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. Thursdays, we don't have calls or texts only because it's crossover Thursday. So we start to deep dive into the next opponent that's up on the schedule for the Silver and Black. And this week 11 action is the Miami Dolphins in South Beach as the Raiders are coming off their bye week. So they were back in practice. They were back in action on Wednesday. Big Michael Mayer returned to practice. That was awesome. Antonio Pierce announced that Gardner Minshew was going to be the starting quarterback moving forward, which was a big surprise to me. But we'll jump all into that and more here on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast as Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, joins the show. We talk all things big storylines when it comes to the Raiders, offensively and defensively. Dolphins, same thing, offensive, defensive storylines, and three keys to victory for each team. How are the Raiders going to come away with the win? How will the Dolphins come away with the win? We'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Prize Picks. Download the app, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll win $50 instantly when you play $5. I'll tell you a lot more about them later on in the show, but let's go ahead and jump right into it. Again, Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, and me, we break things down, all things Raiders and Dolphins. And since the Raiders are the away team, we start things off talking all things Silver and Black. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Storylines. My biggest storylines for the Raiders, biggest storylines on offense and defense, and we'll do here in segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go.
Q, want to welcome you to a crossover. Y'all flying to the East Coast again. We did this last year. How are things going for you this season?
Well, I'll tell you, obviously it hasn't got off to the start that Raider Nation wanted. It wasn't the start that the Raiders won. I say start, it's already week 11, like you mentioned. So 2-7 on the season obviously is not what anyone expected, including head coach Antonio Pierce. There's been changes that were made during the bye week where the offensive coordinator Luke Getsy is now out. Scott Turner goes from being the quarterback coach to being the OC, the coordinator and the play caller. His dad, Norv Turner, the longtime offensive coordinator, is now the senior analyst. And Joe Philbin, a guy that folks in Miami know really well from his time there as a head coach. He is now the offensive line coach, taking the place of James Craig. So there's a lot of changes going on as the Raiders are still trying to find themselves and figure out exactly what's going on and how to get the train back on the tracks the rest of the way.
And you mentioned change, and it sounds like there's going to be another change behind center in this game as well for the Raiders. It's been kind of a merry-go-round and back to Gardner Minshew this week, it sounds like.
Yeah, and it's funny. I actually thought Desmond Ridder was going to be announced as the quarterback moving forward coming out of the bye week. That was my expectations as we met with Antonio Pierce on Wednesday, but he said Gardner Minshew gives them the best opportunity to win. So, Kyle, for me, that means that either they're not seeing what they thought that they were going to see from Desmond Ridder in practice, and he just hasn't absorbed enough of the playbook to feel like they have a real chance to put him out there and he can go out there and execute it without, just kind of turning the ball over and making a mess out of himself. And so Gardner Minshew, the guy they brought in as a free agent, they got $15 million for the next couple of years, fully guaranteed, I guess is the best option. I mean, he's been benched multiple times throughout the season, and he's back at it under center. So we'll see what it looks like. But yeah, I was really kind of surprised. That was one of the big surprises from Wednesday, is that Ridder wasn't named the starting quarterback for the Raiders.
So, Q, you had mentioned a familiar face for a lot of Dolphins fans in Joe Philbin from his time as former head coach, a familiar face that we won't see. One of the biggest contracts given out in free agency this spring with Christian Wilkins, missing his opportunity to come back and play in his former old digs at Hard Rock Stadium and play against the Dolphins. And we're obviously wishing Christian the best, because he is such a tone setter and was a great piece of this Dolphins rebuild before leaving in free agency for a much deserved contract. But I was wondering, on the defensive side of the ball, I also see Malcolm Kuntz on injured reserve. What's
Yeah.
kind of the vibes there around Max Crosby in that defensive front? Because full transparency, and we'll get into Miami in just a little bit, they're down there starting right tackle for the remainder of the season. So figuring out what protection is going to look like and digesting a Raiders front that isn't necessarily what they hoped that it would be from an availability standpoint is one of the big matchups I'm sure is on a lot of Dolphins fans' minds.
Yeah, there's no doubt, man. Max Crosby's going to be Max Crosby. You know, he's going to give his maximum effort. There's a reason why his name is spelled with 2 X's, right? He gives that extra effort. And so you know that he's going to bring it every time he's out there. He wants to play every snap of every game. And, you know, mentioning Christian Wilkins and him not being there, that was a big blow to the Raiders defense. He was the guy that was going to take a lot of attention away from Max from the interior of the defensive line, something that Max really has not had throughout the course of his career. So you thought, okay, you're going to get that big fella in the middle, and he's going to draw some attention. He's going to draw some double teams, which is going to free Max up. Malcolm Kuntz, you know, he came on strong last year, had 9 sacks in the last 8 games of the season and 3 strip sacks. And it's like, wow, this dude's going to really come on. And with Christian Wilkins and Max eating, he's going to be that guy. He tore his ACL before the season even started. So that was a big blow, and he's in a contract year as well. So we'll see what that does for the Malcolm Kuntz and the Raiders defense moving forward. You know, if they're able to bring him back maybe next year on a 1-year or 2-year deal, we'll see. But Marcus Epps is out on the back end. He was really the quarterback of the defense. So all in all, man, the defense that was supposed to lead this team and really be the biggest strength, and the offense was going to really try to complement the defense and stay around and hang around in games and maybe win it at the end. That hasn't happened. That game plan that they had, it hasn't been that game plan because they just haven't had the full arsenal of players that they thought that they were going to have. So it's been kind of a hodgepodge or whatever. They've been trying to put it together, put the pieces together, and they have other guys that have stepped up, but they're not Christian Wilkins. They're not Malcolm Kuntz. They're not, you know, Marcus Epps on the back end. There's a lot of guys that are filling the void as best they can. And it's just that. It's the best that they can. So the defense hasn't lived up to the billion that we all expected coming out of training camp in Costa Mesa, California, that was going to look like. But they're still a serviceable bunch, and they've done some good things and kept the Raiders in some games. The offense just hasn't been able to do anything to really help them out. So they get tired at the end, and that's when you start to see these scores really get out of hand.
So you mentioned, and Dolphins fans can relate, as far as changes this offseason and buttons you push that haven't necessarily worked out the way that you hope that they would. But one of the buttons that I imagine the Raiders did push this offseason that has worked out the way they wanted to is first-round pick Brock Bowers, who is leading this team in targets.
Yes.
He is very impressive from a volume perspective, showcasing all the versatility that he had at Georgia. Just wanted you to maybe kind of set the table on the other side of the coin here. Bowers is one of the straws that stirs the drink in the passing game. Who else are the other identity pieces that have kind of clicked, whether that's for better or for worse, for who you guys have this year and what the offenses look like?
Well, I'll tell you, Brock Bowers has been the bright spot. He really has. The run game has basically been non-existent. That was something that Antonio Pierce said he was going to lean on heavily this year, was the run game. It really hasn't been there. Alexander Madison is the leading rusher right now, and I mean, he's been okay, but the Raiders, I think, have the worst rushing attack in the league. All right, so that hasn't been good. Devontae Adams obviously is no longer with the Raiders. He's now in New York with the Jets, so he was going to take some of the attention. Brock Bowers gets all the attention now, and he's phenomenal. I mean, he's been everything as advertised and then some as a rookie. I think that he's going to be really great as long as he stays healthy. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of other that's been working. Jacoby Myers, I think, is a really good wide receiver. He missed a few games dealing with the ankle injury, but he's back, so that's a positive. So I would just really look at those 2 weapons right there, Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, and understand that that's how the Raiders are going to butter their bread. They're going to try to run the ball. You know that Norv Turner and Scott Turner, they really rely on the run game to make their offenses go. But unless that offensive line gets turned around, unless Joe Philbin shows some magic, and he works some magic during the bye week, and they're ready to get cooking, you know, in that run game, I think it's going to be a heavy dose of Bowers and a heavy dose of Jacoby Myers, and see the best that they can do.
We are going to flip to the other side of the coin here and talk about the Miami Dolphins and all the storylines that they have going on and what has been a surprisingly eventful week for them from a transactions perspective, and a former player chiming in and discussing his perception of what this team was last year that kind of has Dolphins fans on all kind of a tizzy. So we're going to get into all of that in addition to keys to victory here on this crossover Thursday. Make sure that you Stick with us.
So that was the big offensive and defensive storylines for the Silver and Black. And I guess the biggest offensive storyline that we haven't really discussed in great detail, I talked about at the top of the show, was the fact that Gardner Minshew, in fact, is going to be the starting quarterback. I thought Desmond Ridder was going to be named the starting quarterback coming out of the bye week, but AP told us on Wednesday that is in fact Gardner Minshew. He gives the team the best chance to win. So it's not about tanking. It's not about draft order, even though we will update that here on the Locked On Raiders podcast each and every week after games, just to keep you up to date on what's going on. For AP and that team and the players, the coaches, all that, it's all about wins and the team and the players that give them the best opportunity to win. And then Antonio Pierce told us on Wednesday, Gardner Minshew is that guy as the quarterback. So we'll talk about the storylines offensively and defensively for the Miami Dolphins. We'll do that in segment number 2 with Kyle Krabs and myself on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about a couple great sponsors, including Hillsdale College. And time, well, that's our most precious commodity. So don't waste this scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How you can spend it wisely to improve yourself has got to be the most important thing, right? Well, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free. That's right, free. Free. You know my motto, Raider Nation. If it ain't free, it ain't me. They're offering 40 free online courses, including Constitution 101, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and a whole lot more, including a brand new documentary-style course on Marxism, socialism, and communism. So if any of that tickles your fancy, boom, Hillsdale College is for you. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, go deeper with reading, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. So right now, go to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. I also want to tell you about our good friends at FanDuel. And, well, it's never too late to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, and it's all in one place. If you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never, and I mean never, waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. We talked all things Raiders, offense and defensive storylines in segment number 1. So we got to return the favor and talk all things Miami Dolphins storylines in this segment here. Coming up in segment number 3, we'll talk about the biggest, the keys to victory. 3 keys for the Raiders, 3 keys for the Dolphins. That'll come up in segment number 3. But let's go ahead and jump into part 2 of the conversation. Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, and myself. And we started off this thing talking about the return of Tua Tagovailoa. The Dolphins were only averaging about 11 points per game while he was out. They're up to about 21 or 22 points per game now that he's back. So I started off by asking a question about the value. Has Tua shown the value to this team now that he's back? Here we go.
Yeah, I think so. I certainly think the narrative around Tua has to change a little bit as far as this perspective that you could put anybody in there with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and the offensive productions. Well, apparently not. And a lot of it does have to stems from the fact that how they structured their offense really leans into the unique strengths of Tua as a player. And I think there's a bigger picture conversation about how healthy that is when your starting quarterback has the injury and durability questions that he has. But teams have also been breaking their own coverage tendencies pretty dramatically when they've played the Dolphins. I mean, they're coming off of a game against the Rams where they got some variation of 2 high safety coverages on, it was 90% of their snaps. And its teams are just, it's kind of for very different reasons. When Patrick Mahomes came into the league and he was getting all these explosive play touchdowns and teams said, well, you're not going to do that. We're just going to play everybody way off. The wide receivers that Miami has, teams, whether they put them on the same side, they'll box them with 4 guys to cover 2. Or if they're going to put them on either side, they'll play a corner pressed in their face and they'll play a safety rolled up way over the top. And it's put all of the pressure and responsibility on the other skill players to be able to win their individual matchups and some of the investments that Miami's made with Johnny Smith, who's coming on strong. He's actually pacing equally with Jalen Waddle from receiving production this year. Odell Beckham has started to show some signs of life. And a lot of that is also Tua Tagovailoa being much less of a first read dependent quarterback. And that has been something in the early years of the Mike McDaniel marriage. It was a lot of first read stuff because, well, it's Tyreek Hill and we're going to put him as the first read and everything. And he's going to get targeted 40% of the time. And it just creates this lopsided question of how well does he work through progressions when the first progression is always there. And you're seeing this year, one of the key plays that they had in this game against the Raiders against the Rams on Monday night was a third progression on the backside against Tampa 2, where they had an exotic rotation to get to it, and they ran an outside release go with a out route from Jalen Waddle in the slot to the right-hand side, and he looked to work the two-man side. It wasn't there, and on time within his shotgun footwork, gets to the backside and hits Johnny Smith in stride. It goes for 30-something yards because of the space that was allowed by how teams are playing high on the roof. So just to be able to have somebody who can work their eyes across the field has really helped Miami kind of find their life, and that's obviously evident in scoring 27, 27, and 23 points in the last 3 games after averaging 11 points in the first 6 games of the season.
Yeah, that was huge, right? Seeing the only 11 points average and then all of a sudden going up to 21, 22 points per game with the return of Tua. How big was that just for the team, though? How excited did the team get back to see a guy that you knew went through it? The concussion thing is no joke. Like, everyone's concerned, football fans in general. But to see him out there, he's got joy in playing. He's laughing, he's smiling, and he's being successful. How pumped was that, or was that for the team to get that guy back?
I'll say this, amongst this season, I think the biggest way in which my perception is somebody who's covered the team for the entirety of his career, the biggest way my perception of Tua Tagovailoa has changed has been in what his catalyst, what his presence does as a catalyst within the locker room. There are a lot of guys that are really galvanized by him and are energized by him. And when he was gone, you felt the energy of the team and the energy of the skill players on offense, even though they were having success running the ball. Like, it was just not the same enthusiasm about going to work. And then Tua comes back and they give a really spirited offensive effort against Arizona. Tua plays maybe the best game of his career against Buffalo from an efficiency standpoint. He went 25 of 28, and 2 of his incomplete passes were throwaways in the game. And you see guys are running routes harder. The backs are pushing harder for explosive runs. And it's definitely changed my perspective of Tua and what he means as the human being within the locker room and as a leader on the football team this year for sure.
No, I have no doubt about it. And look, Miami's not out of it. I know the season has not gone the way that they want, but I believe they're the 8th seed in the AFC right now. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they're not out of it by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, there's a lot of teams, especially in the AFC, that's got 3 wins or less right now, and the Raiders got 2, and they're sitting at the number 15 seed. So it's a big difference between 3 wins and 2 wins where you could be seated in the AFC. So with that being said, defensively, how are they feeling about their opportunities now that they know they have a competent quarterback and they could score some points? How is the defense kind of reacting to that and in playing their best ball?
Yeah, I thought maybe their best performance of the season came against the Rams. And so a lot of that has been spurred on by the emergence of Chop Robinson, their first-round draft pick. Mm-hmm. They'd really struggled once Jalen Phillips went down with a partially torn ACL and went out for the year after he was just coming back from a torn Achilles, to get organic pressure with their front 4 guys. It was Calais Campbell and Zach Sealer on the inside, but everything else was super irregular, and that's where they had to really dip deep into simulated pressures and bring in unorthodox rushers that are more athletic guys. And then they went against Kyler Murray, and they had a bunch of free runs at him. They just couldn't get him down to the ground. And he got outside the pocket, and that's where he gave up some chunk plays and ended up beating you at the end of that game as a result of that. And then the Josh Allen experience it's one thing to close on him. It's another thing entirely to get him down on the ground, and they experienced that as well. So to have a quarterback in Matthew Stafford that they were really able to get after without having to blitz and pressure was a huge development for them. And it was the first game in the month that Zach Sealer had played. He suffered an orbital bone injury with an incident in practice that cost him 2 games, and he'd never missed a game in his first 4 years in Miami. It's just kind of been like that kind of year. It's like, oh, of course, this on top of everything else is going to happen too. So for the Dolphins defense, I would not expect to see Kendall Fuller, who had his second concussion of the season, suffered against the Rams on Monday night. So that's going to put Cam Smith, the second-year corner, in a big spot for them. And that's one of the big question marks defensively coming in for this team, just because he's not a guy that took reps last year, and he's been kind of up and down as he's kind of been getting his toe wet as a sophomore player.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting, especially to see how, Miami lines up against Brock Bowers, against, well, Trey Tucker's got speed. He's a second-year guy. He's got a lot of speed. But Jacoby Myers, as I mentioned before, a big-time possession guy for the Raiders. So that should be an interesting chess match. But you mentioned Calais Campbell, and I got to go back to that dude. I don't know if he ever gets old. What is it like, man, seeing Calais Campbell going out there doing his thing? I saw him on Monday Night Football batting balls down, and just looks like he plays with the ultimate energy and juice, even at his age. What is it like having that guy as one of the leaders of that defense?
Man, it's so fun. As somebody who's been a big fan of Calais going all the way back to Arizona and Jacksonville and the breakout that he had when he went to Jacksonville, and to have him here even in his age 38 season and is playing as well as he is, it's really inspirational. And I don't know if like the Walter Payton Man of the Year award comes with a fountain of youth that goes in your backyard or what, but he's been on a snap-by-snap basis probably the most impactful player on the defensive side of the football. Like, it is incredible to watch this guy. You just wish he could play more snaps, and you understand why he doesn't and why he kind of lingers around 55-60% of defensive snaps. But when he's out there, man, he is, whether it's rushing the passer, whether it's throwing pick stunts for other guys to kind of loop and run free, whether it's retracing and chasing down the quarterback 10 yards when he's getting outside the pocket or getting his hands up and batting balls at the line of scrimmage. Like, he is just a presence that is constantly felt. And when teams have been able to hit Miami for some chunk plays and explosive plays, it's usually they pick their shots when he's off the field.
Yeah, he's fantastic, man. He's a pro's pro. Definitely like seeing him out there, regardless, like you mentioned, what team he's on. He's just that dude who figures out how to get it done. And again, seeing him on Monday night and seeing his big smile on his face, I was like, how is this dude doing this at 38 years old, still playing with that joy and that energy? But man, he has really got it. So, I mean, defensively, you said he's only playing 50% of the snaps defensively. Who would you say is the biggest threat right now on the Dolphins defense that the Raiders need to be watching out for?
I would say a player that has emerged over the course of the past couple of weeks has been Jordan Brooks, the linebacker, who was formerly with the Seattle Seahawks. He is doing a lot in alignment and coverage responsibility. They just waived David Long, who was a team captain and a starter from last year's team. They benched him after a pretty rough first 6 games for them. And the player that they put in his place is Anthony Walker, who's not quite as dynamic of a player. But Jordan Brooks, with how athletic and long and explosive he is, they'll line him up as an M-man on line of scrimmage. He plays Mike Backer in traditional sets. He'll run the pole in cover 2 and Tampa 2 and take speed at 3 and carry him down the field. He'll cut crossers for guys that are running deep crosses. He can get downhill in the box. He's somebody who has started to really showcase and justify why the Dolphins gave him it was close to $10 million per season was the annual average of that contract. So they saw a lot in him, and he had a lot of food on his plate in Seattle with what he did from a coverage perspective. You're starting to see that expand, and that's allowed them to be a little bit more exotic as this season has gone on from their coverage shells as well.
Well, all I remember is last year, and remember how it looked with the Dolphins and Raiders squaring up with each other. And matter of fact, Antonio Pierce was asked about it on Wednesday about just the Dolphins' speed and how dangerous that is. So, I mean, the matchup should be great. And obviously, anytime the Dolphins play anybody, it's a huge challenge with all that speed that they have. So the defense are always kind of on notice and got to keep their head on a swivel, because if not, as you know, those dudes will run right past you.
Yeah, we're getting into keys to victory next year for both teams on a crossover Thursday episode on the Locked On Network. Make sure you stick with us. We'll be right back.
Storylines when it comes to the Dolphins offensively and defensively, and just to see and hear about the value that Tua brings back to the team. And obviously they're excited to have him back in the mix, and that goes for all the players, goes for the fans of the Dolphins as well. And you never want to see a guy that's banged up and injured or dealing with concussions like Tua was and not able to play. So it's good to see that he's back and in the mix and is happy. So coming up in segment number 3, we'll give you the keys to victory. 3 for the Raiders, 3 for the Dolphins. How is it going to go down on Sunday in South Beach? That's coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best play to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions, and that's billions with a B, of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. All you got to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season on Prize Picks. And the thing about it is, it's not me versus you. It's not you versus your friend. It's you versus the house. Just like that. So all you got to do, again, is pick 2 players, more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. That is awesome. It's the best place to get real money sports action, and over 10 million users. All you have to do is sign up today. Prize Picks put their members first. All withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. So when your picks hit, you can get your money as quick as 15 minutes. They now offer Venmo, too, for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your account this sports season. So sign up today, get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that could lead up to big payouts like Taco Tuesday each and every Tuesday. Prize Picks discounts select player projections of 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. So what you need to do right now is just download the app, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, crossover edition, being brought to you by Prize Picks. Of course, run your game with Prize Picks. We definitely appreciate them. So Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, and myself so far, we've talked about the biggest storylines offensively and defensively for the Raiders, offensively and defensively storylines for the Dolphins. Now it's time to talk about keys to victory. And I'll tell you, Raider Nation, I'll do this on Friday. There's more keys to victory than just 3 for the silver and black, but we are limited to 3 on the crossover edition. So we're going to jump right into it. I actually lead things off with the keys to victory when it comes to the Raiders, and then Kyle will follow up with the keys to victory for the Miami Dolphins. So let's go ahead and jump into part 3 of our conversation, the crossover edition, Raiders and Dolphins, keys to victory, here on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast.
All right, Q. So I guess I'll selfishly ask you for all 3 of your keys to victory first, instead of doing like the ping pong back and forth thing. So in your mind, 3 keys to victory for the Raiders if they're going to win this football game. What does that recipe look like in your mind?
Well, first and foremost, they can't turn the ball over. That's something that's plagued them all season long. Their turnover ratio is terrible. Giving the ball away, 19 times and only taking the ball away like 3. So, 3 or 4. So, again, coming off the bye, they need to be refocused. They need to make sure they protect the ball. Don't turn that thing over. If they turn it over, then it's going to be a here we go again type situation. Even though, again, they're fresh, they're coming off the bye, they get a chance to reset. But I think that'll just be one of those where they start to doubt themselves, and that doubt starts to creep back in their mind. And as we talked about in the first segment, Gardner Minshew's back under center. He's been the guy responsible for most of the turnovers. So he's got to make sure he protects the ball. That's interceptions and fumbles. He's done a combination of the 2. So he's got to make sure that he does not do that coming up on Sunday. So that'll be the first and foremost, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to keys to victory for the silver and black. Also, I don't know how they're going to do it. Not going to lie to you, Kyle. I'm not a scientist. I'm not the smartest dude in the world. They've got to find a way to run the rock. They've got to run the ball. They're the worst running team in the league. For this offense to go, Norv Turner, Scott Turner, they want to run the ball. That's something that they're going to try to build off of. I don't know how they're going to get there, whether that's pass the ball to set up the run or run the ball to try to set up the pass. But they've got to find a way to be able to run the ball and keep their defense somewhat fresh, especially being there in South Beach. And I know it's mid-November, but it's still South Beach, right? And so there's still, as far as I'm concerned, an advantage anytime Miami plays at home. So that defense is going to have to stay fresh. They're going to have to find a way to be able to run the rock. So that'll be key number 2 to getting a Raiders victory. And then key number 3, I think that the playmakers just got to get the ball early and often. Right. Again, they've got to run the ball, but you've got to see a heavy dose of Brock Bowers. You've got to see a heavy dose of Jacoby Myers. And that's what it is, man. At some point, you got to lean on your big time players to make big time plays. I expect that the game will probably be close unless for some reason the Raiders turn the ball over a few times early and then Miami just runs away with it. But, if the game goes the way that the Raiders want it to go, it'll be close. And if it is, then at the end, they're going to need their playmakers to step up and make plays. So I expect that Bowers and and Jacoby Myers will be heavily involved in getting the ball and getting into the end zone a couple times. And, just a side note, while they're not turning the ball over, probably create a turnover or two as well. So I'm selfishly going to throw, 4 in there, but that's just kind of what they've got to do. And, they really don't have an identity. They've gone through 9 games already through 10 weeks, and they don't have an identity of who they are offensively or defensively. So that's something that they're going to have to establish, but we won't know it until we see it come Sunday versus Miami. So as far as I'm concerned, those are the biggest keys for the Raiders to get a victory come Sunday. For you and the Dolphins, what do you think that it has to happen for them to come away with the victory and stay in the hunt there?
Yeah, I think for Miami, a couple things come to mind. The first thing offensively is they need to have a clean operation. They have been a team the first 2 years under Mike McDaniel that's been very explosive play reliant. The explosive plays have not come, but they have in turn found success with methodical 8, 9, 10 play scoring drives, especially since the return of Tua Tagovailoa against the Arizona Cardinals the last 3 weeks. I think they were penalized once offensively against the Rams on Monday Night Football. And it hasn't been like the backbreaking, here's a 12-yard run with an offensive holding and it's a net 22-yard loss. And then it puts you behind the chains and the whole drive is dead, right? Like, so for that, making sure that they're keeping their hands inside the strike zone and the blocks. I think there'll probably be a little bit more vertical and downhill run game oriented without Austin Jackson, their starting right tackle. And I think if you're going to have success making Max Crosby kind of think a little bit more instead of just teeing off and getting up the field, you are going to want to run some power at him, try to pull guards to him, try to bring the tight end extra attention his way. They have some outside concepts in which they have somebody who's engaged, and then their split flow player gets involved for a double team to create a little bit more expansion. So throwing multiple bodies at Max Crosby, but doing so without putting yourself at risk with reckless hands to get a penalty that's going to put you behind the sticks, I think is really important for Miami. I think finding the right balance of their defensive personnel, knowing that this is a team that has Brock Bowers at tight end. I believe Michael Mayer's back on the practice field.
Yeah, big Mike is back. He made his return on Wednesday. Yep.
So that expecting to see 12 personnel with those two guys, you're going to have to dip a little deeper into your defensive line rotation for interior guys if you're going to play base and not play nickel against those guys. And if you're going to do that, finding the right combinations of groups of guys where it's been Calais Campbell and Zach Sealer have been awesome. But outside of that, Deshaun Hand's been a solid rotational guy, but Benito Jones has been very up and down as a nose tackle type player. They had Brandon Peely, who they cut because he was playing poorly, and then they had Neil Farrell, who they elevated off the practice squad, and he's on the 53. They've been trying to find like another guy. And if you're going to play 12 personnel and keep Miami in base, I think you just, especially because Calais Campbell has a snap rotation, you need to be mindful of. I think they have to find that right combination. And then the last thing that I would say for Miami is winning the early downs, because that's where your best organic pass rusher, being Chop Robinson, if he's going to be impactful, a lot of his impactful rushes are coming on third and obvious passing situations. And you want to be able to do that to not have to bring extra bodies from coverage where you have two guys that you feel like you really want to key on from a matchups perspective with what the Raiders bring to the table.
Yeah, man, it's going to be a fun matchup. It really is. And again, I mean, with the Raiders and they have so many questions, right? I just want to see what version of this team is going to be out there. And again, the season has not gone obviously the way that anyone expected it to go, Antonio Pierce or anyone in that locker room. But how do you salvage it? How do you come back off the bye week knowing you have 8 games left starting on Sunday? How do you come back and establish yourself as a real deal team? Or is this one of those where they just can't get right and they just continue to snowball? They're on a 5-game losing streak. So you know how that goes when a team is on a 5-game losing streak or it's a streak like that. It's just the vibes are bad. The energy is bad. The culture feels bad. So they got to find some good. And the easiest place to go to find some good is not South Beach, but that's where they're heading to go. I mean, you go where the schedule takes you. So they got to come out of their bye and head to Miami and see what they can do. And obviously there's a really tough offense that they'll be taking on going up against Coach McDaniel and company. So I want to see how this team reacts and how they come out and what kind of energy and what kind of pride they play with. Because right now they need to dig deep and do the best that they can to try to snap this 5-game losing streak that they're on.
Yeah, with them coming out of the bye and the coaching staff changes, I think there's a lot of intrigue and mystery around the Raiders and how they're going to respond. One thing I know for sure is Q is going to have you covered after the game at Locked On Raiders with everything that Raiders fans need to know. It is your team every day with Locked On Raiders. And same thing for Locked On Dolphins. If you're a Dolphins fan, come on back to Locked On Dolphins. We will have you covered on both sides after this game on Sunday at Hard Rock Stadium. We hope you enjoyed this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Dolphins and Locked On Raiders here on the Locked On Network. I'm Kyle Krabs with your boy Q, and we are out of here. Enjoy the game.
So there it is. That's the crossover edition. Kyle Krabs, great job from the Locked On Dolphins podcast. He's always fun to catch up with. Remember doing the show with him last year. Really good dude. So definitely one of my favorites to do the shows with, and very informative and knows his stuff. So it's great to be able to break it down, talk all things ball with Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins. But there you have it. You heard the Miami side of things. You pretty much know the Raiders side of things. Of course, we'll do more deep diving on that coming up on Friday's edition. We'll also talk with AP on Friday as well and see where this team is at, see where this Raiders team is at heading into Week 11 action, seeing how fresh they are coming off the bye. That's always something that I want to pay attention to, especially with all the changes that the Raiders have at the OC position, the offensive line position, and, of course, North Turner as well being added to the mix as a senior analyst. I actually saw him at the Raiders facility on Wednesday out on the practice field. So we'll jump into that on Friday as we close out the week really strong, head you into the weekend, and head you into Week 11 action, Dolphins and Raiders. Until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.